Well, I don't know about you, but my head's nippy. Okay, it's getting the left and the right brain. But there's a phrase that springs to mind is, the standard you set is the standard you get. And I guess that's where we are just now. So think about that. We've now got a 15-minute session of question and answers. HG, can I ask you to maybe come out here and we'll put lights up as well. There we go. Welcome, Henry. So maybe we can open up to the audience, please.
Can I just ask you,
could you maybe just say your name and where you're from?
A fire company in Fire Scotland, doing fire safety, fire risk assessment, fire extinguishers. You were saying there in the discussion about dry powder extinguishers, and I never really caught it. Were you saying in Malaysia that dry powder extinguishers were being phased out?
No, Europe.
In Europe?
Yes.
Ah. So where's this came from? Is it?
Because dry powder is actually a monoammonium phosphate.
Mm-hmm.
And that is now being used as fertilizer. It's also being used as a type of fertilizer. And because of the Sichuan earthquake, there is a shortage.
Yeah.
Also, if you are looking at about, let's say if we talk about green environment, you know very well that using dry powder is never green.
Yeah.
It's after that, when you use the dry powder fire extinguisher, you have to clean up.
Yeah.
Yes, and it's very messy.
We've certainly noticed it's got a lot more expensive, so that's why we need to compete with the farmers for the
I think the best is still water with probably 2% of AFFF. It's very, very effective. And water is free.
Okay.
Environmental friendly.
Someone else, please? No. Surely we've had so much data and information, Eric, please.
No, I apologise for not coming in half an hour ago, but I was listening to Jose in full speed. But I've picked up one or two things. Now, let's start with dry powder. Isn't there a fraction of that powder, when it's discharged, that if you breathe it, you're more or less on your way to be dying? Because the particle size is so small, it gets into the lungs. It's not trapped anywhere. And the same thing goes for water particles. They may be free, but they're deathly as well, depending how fine in diameter those particles happen to be. I'd like to ask Jose one simple thing. You mentioned here fire risk assessment. Did you mention in the first part of your presentation anything about reverse engineering? Because that is one of the central features of fire risk assessment.
No, I didn't use the expression reverse engineering in the sense that I was just talking about engineering. So which way you want to bring it, it's absolutely irrelevant, to my talk itself. But yeah, I agree with you. I mean, reverse engineering is a practice that is essential for the whole process of engineering a system.
Okay. Open it up. Anyone else for? Jim.
Jose.
Jim, again, can you just...
Oh, sorry.
No, just say who you are for the rest of the audience.
Apologise. Jim Mann, International General Assembly, member of the Institution of Fire Engineers. Question for Jose. You talked about better engineers. How would you envisage your strategy to achieve what you've talked about today?
Well, I mean, I think that there's several steps to it that I think are essential, and we're lacking every single one of them. I think the first one is we need to redefine what the fire safety engineer is. It is not the same thing to be an engineer that was educated to do prescriptive design, within a world where you actually were developing systems to conform with rules, than being an engineer that is actually educated to perform as an engineer, which is basically use all the tools that are available in a manner such that you can optimize the solution. And I think our discipline, while it migrated in a regulatory perspective from being prescriptive to being performance-based design, our mind frame and our education framework never changed. And so I think the first thing that you need to do to be able to define a proper educational framework is define what is the 21st century sustainable fire safety engineer, and what are the skills and knowledge that is essential for that person to operate. Now, once you have that definition, then you have to create an accreditation process that enables you to scrutinize people and make sure that people are capable of performing within that framework. And once you have that framework, then naturally the need is going to be created, and the educational programs will flourish, you know, and the necessary research to fill the gaps will happen. But until you have that definition, we have no idea really what are we targeting. So we need to make that definition and then move on to create a formula that will help us scrutinize people so that actually we can establish in a credible way what fire safety engineering is. And so I think that, to me, until we make that decision of doing those two first steps, we will not have recovered our own profession. Other people are defining that for us, and I think that is a huge problem.
How would you see the way forward to define that?
Well, I mean, it's up to organizations like SIFE, like the Society of Fire Protection Engineers, to actually get together and put everybody that they think to contribute to that, to create a redefinition of the profession. And I think one of the problems that we have right now, that many people see that as a threat, and unfortunately that's a huge mistake, because the proper definition of the profession, I think, is a huge opportunity. You know, because it's not about separating ourselves into competent and less competent. It is about defining a coherent framework in which we can actually grow. I think right now, anybody can come up and just establish itself as a fire engineer, and there's no way we can differentiate what's quality and what's not. So the competition is extremely uneven, and it's the external interest that then will drive the outcome. It's the people from the outside that have an interest that is solid, that actually drive what fire safety engineering is, and we cannot make that decision among ourselves. Now, if we actually create that framework and we structure ourselves and we take over our own profession, we can actually drive the car and make sure that people understand what is necessary to be at each level of fire engineering, and where do I need to go to get there, which is a big problem. I think the opportunity is in our capability to being able to assess. You know, we all want to educate ourselves. We all believe in CPD. We all believe in continuing education and in life learning and all that. You know, if we have a proper target, then we will all meet it. Okay. But the problem is that in the absence of those targets, we just exist, and it is the external people that drive us. So I think, for me, it is the professional organizations that have to make the decision of basically accepting who we are, and then taking a step forward and redefining the profession according to the needs of a sustainable world.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Open it up. Now we've got a lot of young blood up the back there. How about some there? The art and science of fire engineering.
Can I ask
Oh,
questions?
different. Okay, go ahead, sir. Yeah.
My name is Ewan Wilson. I work as a fire investigator in Lothian Borders Fire and Rescue Service. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but there's a point that sort of almost conflicted between the two presentations. Jose, I may have got this wrong, but almost the human behaviour bit, it's almost, am I right in saying you see it as an excuse that's often given for over-engineering human behaviour? Yes, is that
yes,
to
I mean,
summarise?
I have I value enormously the understanding of human behaviour, okay? But we understand human behaviour so we can engineer it out of a picture. That's the whole point. When you decide the gear shift of your car, or your pedals, that's what you did. You engineer out human behaviour. You know, any idiot can drive a car.
Yes.
Okay, so you don't have to make provisions for the sort of longer and shorter person. The system is designed to engineer out human behavior. Now, to be able to do that, you need to really understand human behavior. Now, that's not what we're doing. What we're doing is using human behavior as an excuse.
So you're not trying to almost ignore it, for want of a better expression,
No.
but just to try and look into it more, because so many times I felt in the first presentation, almost every aspect of it, if you read into it a little bit more, there was a human element, whether
Absolutely.
it be from a design phase, from a construction phase, human behaviour in a fire, tenancy, management. Everywhere there was the human element, and all that's come from lessons of history. And I know in my experience that people do very strange things in fires. And
completely. But the system should be robust. I mean, that's the whole thing. You know, basically you need to understand human behavior in such a way that you can engineer it out. And that's our job. You know, so if we don't understand human behavior and we don't know where human behavior plays a role, you know, which is a big long list that was put forward, if we don't understand those things, there is no way we can do engineering properly. Okay, so it's essential for us to be able to understand human behavior, where it actually applies, so that then we can engineer it out. It's not about ignoring it. Okay, it's about
a better
using
understanding
it properly.
And I suppose for many engineers that maybe isn't a comfortable area for them, where they're dealing with numbers rather than, you know, people. You know, it's more difficult to quantify human behaviour.
Absolutely.
For some people that's not as easily calculable as.
Yeah, and it will always be part of your error bar. And you know, when you actually define your error bar, you have to incorporate that uncertainty, but you have to incorporate it in a way such that it's manageable. So you have to create a system that actually is not entirely dominated by the uncertainty. That's the problem. The problem is that human behavior is so uncertain that if you create a system that is not robust, you will be entirely dominated by that uncertainty. What you have to create is a system that is robust enough that even if you behave in a crazy way, the system still works, which is the example of the car. You know, obviously there's mistakes and people crash cars, but in general, you know, when somebody jumps into the car, they know what to do. The system has been engineered in a way that is so robust that it actually can deal with human behavior.
Is that happening in the industry? Is there more of a focus?
No,
Yeah,
I'm not.
Thank you.
Anyone else at the back? I know Eric's already asked the question. Anyone else at the back? No? Please.
The problem you've got is just going on that same situation.
Can you again tell
I'm
us who
sorry,
you're
Tommy
from?
Edward Napier University,
Thank you.
Fire Safety Advisor. The problem you've got is, one, we've got a prescriptive government who panders to popular opinion. Therefore, they have to try and make a system whereby we have rules and regulations as is the buildings that you're talking about. The next problem we've got is human behaviour doesn't just start after the fire has started. Human behaviour starts long before that at the construction method.
Absolutely.
The whole system, it's a very, very wide range that you've got to deal with on human behaviour.
No,
That's where
absolutely.
we're
I
coming
mean,
from.
you know, absolutely. If I own a car and I decide not to change the tires, most likely I'll crash at some point. Okay? So human behavior doesn't start at the accident, it starts much earlier than that. And yes, of course, it is a complicated variable. Nobody's saying it's simple. Okay? It's an incredibly complicated variable. Now, when you put the shell of government, I think one of the things that I think is incredibly interesting about government, as you say, is very responsive to popular opinion. Okay? And obviously we have a problem, you know, in which fire doesn't really attract any kind of attention because we don't have enough fires. So it is not a big variable that is going to move government to do anything else. And this is why it is essential for us to highlight where there is a gain, so that eventually popular opinion understands that if we actually put an effort in understanding fire engineering, there will be a substantial gain to what we're doing. Right now, we're not gaining anything. So sticking with the regulations makes government very comfortable, you know, because what are we losing? You know, the negligible losses of fire are not going to make anybody raise an eyebrow. So might as well just stick with it. So until we really do what the environmentalists have done, or what, you know, other areas have done, of making sure that people are aware of the potential gain that our knowledge can bring to the profession, you know, then we will not go anywhere. You know, government will still rule us and stick to the rule and say that's the way it is. Knowledge is worth nothing in that context.
I agree with you totally in that respect, but until you get that message over, you're always going to have this governmental rules that make us, the common people, if you like, carry through these extra conditions, you have fire safety standards, whatever. We still have to go by them until that culture has been changed. And do you see that actually something in the near future?
Well, I mean, it will happen, and I think, you know, you mentioned about the tall buildings in Asia and all those things. The other problem with prescriptive regulation is that it's designed for a certain type of building. And our ignorance enables us many times to actually say yes to a number of other buildings that basically go within the bounds of what is acceptable for our safety factors. So we have all these hidden mistakes that get created, and in many cases areas like fire, because we've never taken control of it. You know, the only way in which the government changes is when we start seeing massive failures. And the moment we start seeing massive failures, then the government responds, because that makes the headlines. Okay? And public opinion drives government actions. So the other option that we have, which is highly unsustainable, is waiting until the disasters happen. And you know, given the size of disasters that we've had since September 11th, for example, I can guarantee you that given the strength of all the other drivers, it will take very massive and really regular disasters to be able to make the government wake up. And so if we're going to wait for that, you know, fair enough. I mean, I think that's always an option.
The unfortunate thing about waiting for something like that to happen is history shows us over the years that after a disaster, more regulations come in.
Absolutely.
And that's where that's just like an evil circle. You're going to go down and down with that. So it's
in the absence of knowledge, yes, that's exactly what
very
happens.
difficult.
But then if you take other professions where are actually dominated by knowledge, you realize that when you have failures, they're corrected by means of better methods. And there's plenty of examples of that, of areas of engineering design, where when we have made a failure, we have corrected it by using a better method, not a better regulation.
Okay, I'm not going to hold it that. Anyone else at the back? I've got a question here, please.
Matthew Broadfoot from Burrahappel. Just similar to what Jose was saying there about how the regulation is designed around specific sort of geometry and shape of building, and going back to part of what HG said about how we shouldn't really cherry pick within the regulation as to where we apply fire engineered approach within that. Is that not down to the engineer to take into account a holistic approach for each building? Because very few buildings, when we actually look at them, would fall within that specific geometry for which the regulation is designed. So in order to take that out, we have to take into account how an engineered design or part of an engineered design would affect the other aspects that are perhaps meeting the prescriptive code, and rather than designing the whole building within that fire engineering solution, because it is still cost driven by the client.
In fact, if you look at the role of a fire engineer, whether you design using performance-based approach, I'm not saying that that is not advisable, because the moment the building goes beyond the prescriptive boundary, you have no other choice but to design using performance-based approach. But what I'm saying is that even though you adopt this particular concept, you still have to go back to the prescriptive codes and standards. Because if you want to incorporate any of the active or passive system, you cannot base on your expertise, because these are already being established. System need to be designed this way, system need to be tested this way, must be verified this way. So even though you adopt the holistic approach, you still have to go back to the prescriptive. In fact, in Singapore, the professor from New Zealand is saying that in very near future, probably performance-based will go back to prescriptive fire behavior design. Because at the moment is the assumption is all done by the individual engineers. So who to verify? Even with a peer review, but who is to verify? Who are the experts to verify whether the fire size, the heat flux that is being presumed by these engineers are actually accurate? Question is, accurate for how long? Of course, I know Jose is going to say that all these are actually the fears that we have that actually curb the progress of our engineering. But having said that, the moment the engineer leaves the building, you can imagine the chaotic situation they're going to provide to the owners, and more importantly, to the public who are going to occupy the building. Human behavior is not, when I raise the issue, it's not to put any hurdles in any design. But if just imagine a building with 10,000 people inside. When you have a fire, it's going to be total chaotic. If you don't manage it, there's no evacuation. Definitely. You just imagine. So you like it or not, you still have to look at it. I'm talking about practical approach. Of course, we can talk about a lot of theoretical. I'm looking at a practical approach. Now, if you're inside that situation, what are you going to do? If you look at a lot of the fire incidents in the past, the casualty rate is not due to the fire, but due to stampede. So what does that tell you? We have to learn from past experience, past case study. Yeah. So you still have to look at management. Because as you build bigger and taller, you have no other choice. You cannot say, we ring the alarm, let these people escape themselves. They can't. Question is, in fact, beyond certain floors, you're not going to evacuate them. It's impossible. So you need to come up with proper strategy. If they want to stay, you need to then start to design refuge centers, self-contained. And that it has to be managed. Whether are they going to be there for half an hour, 3 hours, or what? So you see, you need to adopt a holistic approach. It's not just fire engineering.
Maybe just take 2 more questions and then we'll finalise for today and offer a vote of thanks. Anyone else? I know Eric's got one. Eric, over to you, sir. There you go. You're on the stopping block.
I apologise for not saying the first time, but it's Eric Marchant. I used to be at this university, but that was a long time ago. I think we're all being a bit pessimistic, truly. Well, all the people who've spoken are being a bit pessimistic. First of all, the old prescriptive, they call it, standards, were really based on performance. But performance through experience. We had a fire, it didn't fall down, therefore it must be okay, so we shall do it again like that next time. So it is truly performance. And all the rest of it that you've mentioned just now simply follows on from there. And I was at, no, never mind about the meeting I was at earlier today, and I used to go to a meeting because I was chairman of one of the committees that looked after the regulations in Scotland for quite a long time. But there was a big change. Oh no, one thing I did used to say occasionally was, how many people shall we allow the fire to kill? Now, it certainly straightens out the mind, because it may not be none. And I leave that as a thought with you. But quite a number of years ago, both in England, Wales and Scotland, we shifted from prescriptive rules into functional statements. Now that's a terribly important shift. It's because it says, you will achieve. And you can do it whichever way you feel free and knowledgeable enough to do it. We're giving you guidance in case you're so ignorant you haven't got any idea how to meet the challenge of this functional statement. That's the situation we're in now. And of course, before I came in, I heard Jose say about legislative framework, you see, and I thought, fine. It starts when the client has an idea in his mind, I'd like to build a building. What sort of building shall I build? Fire safety starts there. The building starts there. Legislation starts there. And it follows all the way through the design, the construction stage, and now, especially now, the occupied management stage. Because the whole responsibility now shifts to people like the dean of the faculty. You don't have deans anymore, but you know what I mean. It's his or her responsibility to manage the fire safety in that patch. A lot of them don't understand that, which is very sad. But also, one needs to remember very carefully, and I have to remember this almost every other day, is that fire safety is one component of building design. It's not the most important, and the most important is usually measured by how often does this need to be applied. So we have the acoustical engineer, we have the structural engineer, and so on and so on. I think a long time ago I wrote a paper that listed 36 professions that have a contribution to make to building design and procurement. That number won't go down. We are one of those people in that 36.
Can I interrupt you for a minute, Eric? I think first of all, you're making a huge mistake, because fire safety engineering is probably one of the disciplines that has the deepest effect in the design process.
I didn't say effect.
No, but therefore it becomes one of the critical components, and it affects every other aspect of the process. And the second is that when you actually live in a proper framework where competence is defined adequately, and you have an adequate dialogue between competent professionals, everything that you said becomes a moot point, because it will become completely incorporated in the thought process of the design of the building. And I think that's the part that we're missing. It's not about the mistakes and the details and the things we're not taking into account. It's about the competent professionals that are delivering the proper design. And if you have a competent professional that is properly defined and properly accredited, and competence is clearly established, then all these things will be taken into account. So if we waste our time thinking about all those details, instead of doing what we really have to do, which is define competence and define our profession, we're going to be stagnant, and we're going to be driven by the deans that you mentioned.
Okay, and I don't disagree with anything you said, but we, fire safety engineers, are largely ignorant about the contribution that the other members of the design team make and how we interact with them.
Yeah, but I go back to the definition of competence. You see, the fire engineer that you're talking about is not a competent fire engineer. If a fire engineer is ignorant of what all the other professions do in the design process, he is not a competent fire engineer. So everything becomes a moot point when you define competence. So we cannot focus on those details. Let's just focus on what really is important, which is the definition of competence.
Okay,
yes.
guys, can we hey, I told you he was a very passionate person. Eric is likewise. I think I'll call it a time-out on that. Thank both our eminent speakers tonight. We started off deciding whether we're going to jump off with a parachute or hang gliding, but really come back to a very final thought there, which is about competence. And that for me is it. And I think if we define what that is, and there's something about, can we actually sit into the driving seat of this car, define what a competent driver is, and I would like to aspire to what is advanced driving looking like, what's advanced fire engineering looking like. So I'll finalise like that. Can I offer a vote of thanks to our two great speakers, thank you.